The question was, what new knowledge or skill have I learned recently in the last couple of years, and how has the ministry changed over time? I would say the one thing I've learned that's had the biggest impact on my ministry was at a conference I went to for continuing education. It was a formation conference. And the notion that I took away from that was the idea of flipping the classroom. I grew up with the idea that you went to class, algebra, history, whatever, and then you were sort of taught whatever you had to and then given homework afterwards. And so, thanks, hon. And so you would be given homework to reinforce or to help remember whatever that was or to demonstrate further knowledge. This notion that comes to us from educational theory was that no. What you do is you have deliverable before class, and then in class is when you go deeper into knowledge. And so that idea of sort of prepping students before they come into the classroom and then using the classroom environment to have small group discussion, go deeper, was one thing I've learned. But then taking that in a ministry context means that a lot of my formation in parish is with adults. It means that we'll do YouTube videos sent out to the congregation ahead of time. We'll do reading lists ahead of time. So when we get there, the conversation is already past chapter 1, and we're saying, well, we all saw the video, or we all read this book, or we all had this instruction, and so now let's talk about what it means. It's not the what, it's the so what portion. And so that's one thing. But then also I realized, and it came at the same time, I'd gone to a Lenten preaching series and heard Amy Butler preach her sermon. And I was taught to preach a sermon with, make your point, then have an illustration, and we were in homiletics together, so we remember well. Make your point, then have your sermon illustration, maybe a second point, another illustration. And what she did was really took that concept of flip the classroom into her sermon. And I've been doing that ever since. So instead of starting with the scriptural story, today in our gospel lesson we see X, Y, and Z, and here's the theological lesson, and by the way, this is what happened to some person or me, beginning with that experience. And so starting homiletically with the experience of last week I was at the gas station. And this was what took place. And it reminded me of the lesson we heard in the gospel today. So it's flipping that experience into the theological piece coming second. And why it's sort of had an impact on me is because that's how I find my parishioners think. They're thinking about, in my life and in the world, this is what happens. And then when they have those moments, they think, now where's God in this? They're not thinking, where is God, where is God, where is God, and here's my life. And so it seems to make more sense for their growth and for their formation spiritually, and it makes more sense liturgically for me and homiletically. How's my ministry changed? I guess I answer that as part of that, just being aware of pulling in the world from into the church world. How will you address the second question then? How will you address the lack of clergy available for parishes, especially small parishes? Well, I think we all know this, but just so we're clear, we're experiencing about 400 retirements a year in the Episcopal Church. 10 years ago, we had 6,000 odd active clergy. Now we've got about 4,000 odd active clergy. Each year, about 400 retire, and across the denomination, we ordain about 200. And so the drop has been going like this. It has been felt like this because we've got this wonderful cushion of retired clergy who want to work and want to stay active in retirement. And now they're getting to a place where they don't want to be working. They're getting too old. They're saying, I'm ready to do things with grandchildren, and so we're feeling that ever more tightly. But the reality is that decline has been going on for a while. The factors that are leading to the decline taking place are that people are not looking for the cost of seminary. I mean, theological education is entirely expensive. Places like VTS and now Yale, Berkeley have gone tuition free. But I still think we need to be encouraging people to go to ordained ministry and answering the questions of how do we make it possible for them. For those that are in careers already, that means they're going to have to change their homes. Their spouse has to leave a job, perhaps. There are huge hurdles to get over. So the more encouragement we can give to people pursuing ordination, the better. We also need to be looking not just second career people like I was, but those who are coming out of college and having programs that encourage a young priest initiative like we have in the Diocese of Virginia. They encourage people in college to say, do I see this as my possibility of ministry? When I served at St. Martin's, one of our very active lay people was Dave Douglas. Dave is the head, or maybe he still is, maybe he's retired now, the head of the law school at William & Mary. And Dave had gone to, I believe, Princeton or Yale for an MDiv. And he realized at 26 years old that as he was going into pastoral care with people, that he felt like he had no gifts to offer. What do I do as 26 years old and sit down with someone who has just lost a grandchild? What do I do with someone who is facing divorce after a 20-year marriage? What do I do in these life situations? And he concluded, well, I need to go out and get experience. He got the experience and found another career and never came back to ordained ministry. That narrative has been too long in our denomination. For years, our commissional ministries said, come back in 5 years. We need to have programs, and I would be one to encourage people who are in college to begin discerning their call and say, how do we help support someone who is 22, 23 years old, see themselves in parochial ministry? How do we help see them with that? We also need to be addressing, the short of the clergy, we also need to be addressing the roles that clergy have. And I think that calls for us to raise up better administrators who are lay professionals in the parish. I didn't go to seminary to learn how to negotiate a septic contract. I didn't go to seminary to learn how to manage a forestry timber, which I now have in my parish. I went to seminary to learn how to be a theological person, to raise up the people of God, to teach, to preach. And what we do is we ask people to come out with wonderful 3-year programs, wherever they are, and then begin the work of running a small business. But we don't give them any training to do so. What's happened in the law profession and the medical profession is that professional administrators have been rising up so that those people trained to do their work can do their work. I think that we should be raising up lay administrators. Doesn't have to be full-time, but we need to raise up lay administrators so that when someone comes out of seminary, they feel like, I can do this work. I've been trained to this work, and it's a better value for the parish. I'm going to stop there and see what questions y'all have, because we only have a limited amount of time.
Yes, now you're, whatever you would like to ask at this point.
That last position, you're talking about a paid position?
Whether it's paid or volunteer, what we need to be saying is, how do we raise up people who take on that job of being the administrator? So the rector, the priest in charge, the deacon can do the work that they're called to do. And some parishes have those. What I don't see across denominations and across this diocese, in my observation, is any kind of program that then supports those people in their work. And so if we can support lay administrators, whether they are paid or not, but give them a task, a curriculum, so they can have confidence in their job, they can run the parish effectively, we'll be supporting the work of the ordained ministry as well. I think your hand was up first.
Hi, so I'm a freshman over at William & Mary, and I was wondering, since college is a time where we are discerning essentially what we will be attempting to do for the better part of the next 50 years, what would you do specifically to support young people in discerning their ministry, whether it be in the laity or to some ordained ministry?
Well, first, William & Mary is blessed in having the chaplaincy that is supported by Bruton Parish and the Diocese of Virginia. There are other colleges that aren't. So the first thing I would do is try to get chaplains in all 6 of the state-supported universities within the diocesan boundaries. To begin that, partnerships with parishes could be effective. Funding from the diocese can help leverage some pieces. But I think having an ordained person associated with the parish or not is critical in that process. The second thing I would do is look at internships, of saying, if you are interested in pursuing ordained ministry or lay ministry, let's look at giving you some experience so that you can serve a parish, maybe the summer between your junior and senior year, to say, what does it look like? You can know what a job looks like in other careers, but do we give you a chance to say, what does it look like to go into a hospital room for a pastoral call? What does it look like to be vested on Sunday morning to assist with liturgy? What does it look like to be participating in a vestry meeting? What does it look like just being in the office 9 to 5 on Monday through Thursday when some things happen and some things are very boring? So to give those experiences, say, which could also come with a stipend, saying if you're going to give up your summer, that means you're not going to be out there taking on the job of caterer, whatever you would be doing, taking an internship with IBM or other firms. So how do we compensate that to you to make it attractive? So you're saying, yes, this is an equal and valid path for me to follow. Are you having a good year?
So far, so good.
Good.
First round of exams hasn't happened yet.
Okay,
I
okay.
always hope people check back after that.
Okay, good. I think you were next.
Well, in relation to what you were just saying, somebody told me the other day that tomorrow in the Diocese of Virginia, they are ordaining 4 deacons to priesthood, and none of them have jobs yet.
I know that 2 of them I know do have jobs, just because I know them personally. And part of that is that finding the right fit with the right person. And so, again, rural ministry, I love rural ministry because I think in rural ministry you have this great diversity that you don't have in urban places. That's just been my experience. If you're in a place where there's 6 churches in the city limits, people can choose where they want to be. If you're in a county where there's only one Episcopal church, then you've got everybody from the person who owns the local factory to the person who cleans the local factory there, because they want to be Episcopalian. So I love rural ministry. I think part of the challenge of rural ministry with someone who's coming out of seminary is giving the experience of what does this look like? Our seminaries are generally in urban places, so they may be choosing field sites that give them a big city experience. And so how do we encourage people to go into the smaller place? There are plenty of places that want priests. If those 4 don't have jobs, it's because they're being perhaps selective. I know 2 of them have jobs. One of them's in a very large city, and one of them is in a suburban area. And there is a movement toward people, we see this not in the Episcopal Church, but we see this nationally. There's a movement back from urban areas to rural areas. And so it's a trend that I think Q Center's been tracing this for the last 2 years. And so we're seeing that tide come back in.
And Sven, if you would repeat the question, I was just texted by
Gotcha.
a colleague that's
I
watching this and
said, we don't
they
know the
can't hear the
questions, certainly.
Yes.
You spoke about a new skill, how the skills that you bring from your previous career. How do those lend themselves to the position as bishop?
The question Linda asked is, how do skills I had in a previous career lend themselves to the task and ministry of being a bishop? So my former career was in development, alumni relations and development, primarily in academic affairs. I spent my last 6 years in that career working for the Bishop of Virginia. I tell people I raised all the money that Peter Lee got to spend, and he was much better at spending than I was at raising because he had initiatives and things to do. So partly what that means is, and I tell clergy this when we talk about fundraising and stewardship, the first question that you always ask in any kind of fundraising situation is not, will you give? The first question you always ask is, do you believe? Because if you believe, then it naturally follows to begin a conversation that talks about, will you give? If you don't believe, then this is the stupidest thing you could ever do is ask someone to open up their checkbook because they don't already believe in that. So I think the skill is listening and keeping my eye on what is the mission of the church. It's not about just getting the money in the door to make ministry possible. It is about looking for creative ways about what are we called to do. I think that we're called to be the body of Christ in this diocese. And I think one of the DNA pieces that we have is that idea of wilderness. I think about 1607. Those Anglo folks came to what was then the wilderness. Even the Native Americans didn't live on Jamestown Island. It was a wilderness to them as well. But we came to this place for the wilderness. As the diocese grew, we went to wilderness when train stations would open up. We went to wilderness when places would change because of economic realities. We continue to go to wilderness, and I would say that if we were to listen to the narrative of the Diocese of Southern Virginia, we're going to hear that call back to the wilderness. Now the wilderness looks very different. Now the wilderness looks like there is addiction issues going on in our households. It looks like there are families that don't look like the nuclear families that were 20 years ago. It's going to look like there are people that don't speak our languages, but those are all wilderness places. And I would say from my other background, my former career, of listening to the narrative, seeing what is the mission, and then seeing how do you connect that to making it funding reality so it happens. I would double down on Chanko. I would say, Chanko, we have this conference center that is in the middle of nowhere. And there's a reason for that. It wasn't just because the land was cheap. I think it's because theologically we know we're called to the wilderness. And so what I would be doing is offering programs at Chanko that enhances the ministry of people in whatever diocese or wilderness they're in. So like a program for parish administrators, lay or compensated, to say, come to Chanko 4 times a year. Each time is going to be a content-driven program so you can learn what it means to be a parish administrator. You can learn what it means to be a rector. You can learn what it means to fill in those gaps and then go back to your place of wilderness and begin proclaiming the good news. That's what this diocese has done for over 400 years. So to answer your question, I got off track. Okay.
All right, very good.
Thank you very much.
much.